ago you saw me what was coming. It was creeping on a come up, now it's right up in your face. Face it, let it resonate up in your bone a minute. When you shiver, make a sliver big enough for it to have a space. Ripped like.
Hello everyone, Ruffled Bricks here with the RB Sides, a music review channel dedicated entirely to remix albums and EPs. In this video we're going to be looking at the 2022 EP by Clipping called Clubbing, or as I'm most likely going to call it throughout, Clubbing. If you want me to pronounce vowels, give me the vowels. I had this problem with The Weeknd, I'm going to have it with everyone else. Clipping are the experimental noise hip-hop trio comprising of William Hudson and Jonathan Snipes on production, and Daveed Diggs on vocals, although Diggs of course is probably more famous for his role in the blockbuster film Velvet Buzzsaw. I think there was some small-scale Disney thing he was in as well, not sure. Clubbing is... I'm not going to be able to keep this up. Clubbing is an EP that features dance music remixes of 3 tracks from Clipping's back catalogue of abstract hip-hop albums, focusing on 2 tracks from their debut album Clubbing, and 1 track from their 2019 album, There Existed an Addiction to Blood. Clipping's discography only spans just over a decade at the moment, but they are definitely not a band who are shy of being remixed. Their debut album has a full remix companion to it. Their 2 horrorcore albums have a whopping 4 EPs worth of remixes of them. A couple of their interim EPs also have remixes on them, and there is a 24-hour remix album of their track Dream, which, yeah, I don't know about covering that one. They even released the acapellas from their first 2 records for free on Bandcamp, so any of you can make a remix. So for a remixed focused channel like this one, they are an absolute godsend, but I'm going to be focusing on this short EP first, as it's the only remix record of theirs that I've already listened to prior to starting this channel, and even though I bought Clipping back in the day, I kind of feel like my knowledge of their oeuvre isn't really as full as it should be just yet, so we're going to start off in the shallow end.
Game don't wait. Heavy, wait. Eyes heavy, but it's time to grind. Motherfucker can't be late.
I bought Clipping's first album, Clipping, and grow up. I bought Clipping's first album back in 2015, the year after it came out, as I think I saw it on an end-of-year list. Certainly the first thing that I knew about the album was the video to Inside Out, in which Daveed Diggs' head turns into an entire crime scene. Some impressive acting chops there. Clipping represents a pretty common example of a debut album, as it has a lot of different ideas in it, but many of them don't really cohere that well. The main tension comes between trying to find a middle ground between the hip-hop elements and the noise elements, as most of the tracks on this album generally tend to have more of a bias in one direction rather than the other. On the one hand, there are tracks that seem to have more commercial designs on them, and on the other hand, you've got stuff like the opening track or the closing track that both are very much defined by searing bursts of harsh white noise.
You ain't even gotta sleep, don't sleep, it's clipping, bitch.
Diggs' flow also feels kind of experimental on this album, as a lot of time he's going for these kind of measured rhythms that change frequently. They're technically very impressive, but they do sometimes feel a little bit studied and academic at points as well. My favourite tracks on this album tend to be the ones where Hudson and Snipes play around with the notion of what constitutes a beat without just going for all-out noise. So tracks like Taking Off with its stuttering rhythm, or Story 2, which continuously changes time signature and energy across the course of the track.
God damn it, Mike knows he gotta get home fast as he can. Looks up in the sky, glows familiar, knows those families died with similar.
Another favourite of mine is Get Up, which is the basis for one of the tracks on this remix EP. The entire track is built around a loop of an alarm clock, and I can see why it might be a little harsh to the ears of some people listening.
Shit. No work, no food, still eating off paper plates. Banana clip is a paperweight, paper mate.
Given that it goes on for 4 minutes with not any major changes in it apart from in the choruses. Each chorus has more and more harmonic elements added to it, with the last one having this massive flourish where a huge synthesized fanfare builds up.
Here when they turn on the street light, hustle till they cut 'em off, that's the street light. Got the chrome on my head that I bought for sale.
and it's a really nice release after all the tension that the track creates. The chorus is sung by Mario Yakoda, whose very pleasant tones offer a pleasing counterpoint to the aggression of the alarm. And Diggs's flow works really well on this track as well, starting off slowly with just a few little couplets here and there, as if he's just waking up. And then as he becomes more and more on it, his flow just quickens significantly. I really like this track. It's a simple idea, but the execution is just sublime. The other track from this album that Clipping draw from for their remix EP is Dominoes. Here the rhythm of the track is built around samples of drums being manipulated. There's a lot of record scratch type effects on here, although they're very digital in nature, so they kind of similar to the ones that Aphex Twin used on his remix of 808 State. Despite all the glitching though, the beat is very slow, very spacious. Diggs's rapping is a lot slower and more careful on this one compared to others where he just tries to machine gun syllables at you as quickly as possible. Melodically, there's not a huge amount going on in the verses apart from a cacophony of drips that almost sound a bit like the titular Dominoes. And there's also this robot whine that comes in regularly that goes
Don't care, put one in the air, put sun in the mirrors, drive east, get bossed up, these sirens are serene.
Where this song falls apart for me is the chorus, which sounds like it's been beamed in from a completely different track. You've got a pitched down sample of someone, possibly Diggs, saying drop that game on them, stuttering it out repeatedly as if someone's playing them on a sampler. And beneath that you've got this substantially EQ'd nursery rhyme piano and a children's choir.
Drop that game on 'em, drop that game on 'em, drop that game on 'em.
I very much remain to be convinced about the virtues of a bunch of kids trying to sing. It's been scientifically proven by conceptual artists that no one wants these elements. Why do they keep coming back?
Hey everybody, it's Labor Day! Labor Day!
The other track that gets remixed for the Clubbing EP is Nothing Is Safe from their first horrorcore album, There Existed an Addiction to Blood. For those not in the know, horrorcore is a subgenre of hip-hop that is much more based around horror-themed lyrics, and to some extent horror-themed production as well, although I have to say that the 90s horrorcore that I've listened to, which mainly comprises Gravedigger's 6 Feet Deep or Dr. Octagon's Dr. Octogynecologist, don't necessarily go in on the theme quite in the way that Clipping does with these albums. Frequently throughout you get these drones and industrial elements that remind me of kind of late 70s, early 80s post-punk like This Heat or 23 Skidoo. Basically though, horrorcore gives Hudson and Snipes' noise-based elements much more of a context, or at the very least a coherent through line. At times it also reminds me of a slightly more toned down Dialect, the Agit Hop group who had a lot of shoegazy drone elements to their work. Although in quieter moments it reminds me a bit more of the dark spoken word of King Midas Sound's later albums. Quite a few elements throughout feel like direct references to horror films. However, you've got the organ on He Dead, you've got samples of some anxious heavy breathing at the beginning of Run For Your Life that are arranged into this underpinning percussion, or in the track that we're looking at here, Nothing Is Safe, you've got this high-pitched piano that is very reminiscent of the soundtracks to Halloween or The Exorcist.
Blood seeping from his neck as he struggled to breathe. Wood and floor stained wet, gets off the more that he bleeds, he leaves believing.
The track starts with this high piano key that sets a pulse not that dissimilar to the alarm clock in Get Up. Diggs's lyrics basically go into the gore caused from the cops raiding a trap house, and the track is mainly built around this slightly melancholic low bass synth melody. Drums are used fairly sparingly, with the most notable percussive element throughout being what sounds like a dog barking in a tunnel.
Didn't know when something was coming, but it creeping on the come up, now it's right up in your face. Face it.
The track progresses fairly slowly, but as it goes along, the choruses start developing these heavy horror synths that basically jump out at you, gun in hand.
It's a golden halo that could be the sun. Long ago you saw me what was coming, it was creeping on the come up, now it's right up in your face. Face it, let it resonate up in your bone a minute when you shiver, make it sliver big enough for it to have a space.
It's a cool sound, it's a little cheesy in its overt aggression, but it's a nice little touch. Although in terms of pacing, it maybe blows its beans a little too quickly in the second chorus. The third chorus doesn't really have as much of a surprise after that, and that's possibly why the spike in views on the official video pulls around the second chorus rather than the third one. I think also the 808 beat in this track doesn't really work for me too much. I think I like it more when it doesn't have the drum machine underpinning it, particularly on the verses. I think once the drum becomes a mainstay, the gap in energy between the choruses and the verses feels like it's been kind of bridged a bit, so to me the second half of the track isn't so impactful. It's a decent track for launching this album. There's a lot of elements to it that I enjoy individually, but as a whole it doesn't quite work for me as well as perhaps I feel like it should. The one thing the three tracks that I've discussed here do have in common is tempo-wise, they all seem to be somewhere within the 110 to 125 BPM range, which is a very common tempo for dance music. According to Jonathan Snipes, the notion of turning some of Clipping's tracks into dance remixes has been knocking around for quite a while, albeit originally in joke form, but apparently they were waiting for the right inspiration to come along before they fully got into the idea, and they found it with NPR's Tiny Desk concerts, in which the band took the concept literally and performed on the tiniest desks that they could find, even to the point of using bonsai effect pedals, the world's smallest MacBook, and a tiny mic for David Diggs. The closing track from the Tiny Desk set was a high-energy disco remix of Nothing Is Safe, which is the first track that you get on this EP. The NPR concert was a year prior to this EP release, but the remix is more or less exactly the same. The track starts with a bass line which is the same melody as that they use in the Carpenter-esque piano in the original, but basically pitched down so that it has what Snipes refers to as a Moroder-esque quality, although it personally makes me think of a more sinister version of Like a Virgin by Madonna. The kick drum then comes in, which, in combination with the bass line, then makes me think a little bit of Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes. That kind of stark but driving combination of bass and drums. The drums are provided by Chuck Woody Hodge, who did some percussion on the Addicted to Blood album, and I have to say, this disco beat works a treat, especially with the aforementioned dog bark snare coming over it in the first chorus. Diggs' flow works really well over this minimal disco thing they've got going though, and I actually think it suits the song a little bit better. The energy seems to be a bit more tempered on this one, and I think the second and third choruses, although they're not as balls out as the ones in the original, still have a pleasingly menacing quality to them.
Barely had to summon what was coming, it was creeping on the come up that was right up in your face. Face it, let it resonate up in your bone a minute when you shiver, make us live a big enough for it to have a space.
Genuinely though, even though I think the original has decent elements to it, I think this song just works better as a hip house track. It feels a little less self-conscious than the original, although one thing I will say is I think the original ends better.
Nothing is.
The original just drops everything down to the drums, which gives it a suitably creepy quality, whereas in the remix I think they're thinking along dance floor lines, so the bass line groove just continues until the end.
Nothing is.
Apart from that though, the pacing and the energy of this version feels more organic to me, and I think it's a fantastic remix. The second track on this EP, Drop Low, is basically an instrumental version of the Nothing Is Safe remix. This version also debuted in an online concert, this time as part of a fundraiser for the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers that was run by the rapper B. Dolan and took place entirely in Minecraft. This was a streamed 2-day concert that took place during lockdown, and Clipping responded to the challenge by creating an entire set of dance remixes of their tracks, which basically went on to form the guts of this album. And this instrumental version of the Nothing Is Safe remix formed part of their set, with Diggs doing some vocal ad-libs on it during the concert.
Just when you thought it was safe.
Those are absent here, and you basically just get a simmering tech house version. You get to hear the cool harmonising on the bass line a bit better in this version, as it's buried under the vocal in the original. There's also a short break after everything drops out with a massive echo, and then a snippet of the original vocal comes in before the track restarts.
Drop the lights or drop low.
Overall though, this version's a bit too minimal for my liking. It doesn't even have the dog bark in it. The chord changes of the choruses are gone as well. It's basically just the bass line from start to finish. I could see it working in a tech house set, but honestly I'd prefer to hear the original vocal version in a club. And to be honest, the lack of Diggs vocals ends up being kind of a problem with the remaining 2 tracks on this EP. The third track is Get Mine, which is the remix of Get Up. It starts exactly the same with the alarm clock sample, but then they chop it up into this kind of disco Morse code. The drums are even more overtly 80s disco than the ones on Nothing Is Safe. But then you get a 303 bass line, which brings the track into the 90s. And when we get to the chorus, it's basically a cut-up of Yakoda's vocals with a very EDM sounding keyboard line. So as far as dance music influences go, this one's taken influence from all over the shop chronologically. The main problem with this track though, I would say, is structure, as clippings seem to be torn between whether they want to stick to the original song structure or turn this into a full-blown dance track. Diggs' vocal features very little in this track. There's a snippet of him saying hustling is a habit, which gets repeated towards the end of the track a bit, but that's pretty much it. The verses are basically replaced by the cut-ups of the alarm, the drums and the 303, and so the energy changes back and forth between the more rhythmic elements and the more melodic elements in this, without ever really successfully cross-pollinating with each other. Structurally, I think this probably would have worked better if they'd done it as a kind of 5 to 6 minute house or techno song, as opposed to a 3.5 minute instrumental, as it would have been able to give some of the elements maybe a little bit more breath and enable them to develop more over the course of the track. As it stands, the absence of Diggs feels fairly pronounced, as is the problem with the last remix on the EP, Drop That. This is a remix of Dominoes, and the main elements it keeps from that track are the Drop That Game on Them vocal sample and the robot whine, which come in straight off the bat on this track. You get a bass line that then reminds me of Naughty's progressive house records, before some EDM keyboards come in that are very similar to those on Get Mine. There's a high choral note that adds a bit of atmosphere to the choruses here, but again, it's one of those tracks that seems hamstrung by the fact that they're trying to keep the original song structure rather than just going balls to the wall with making this a dance track. Diggs' vocals once again don't feature, and to be fair, I did do an experiment where I put the a cappella from Dominoes over Drop That just to see how the vocals would have fit on this version.
Khakis and house shoes, pork pie had ace deuce, gold thin rim bifocals, eyes in today's news.
Thanks for making those acapellas publicly available, Clipping. Very much appreciate it. And it is clear to me that his full vocals wouldn't really have worked on this track, as they are significantly slower than the house beat that they've got going here. Nonetheless though, maybe throwing in a few snippets of the vocal dub style across the course of the track might have made it a little bit more interesting. When they played this track in the Minecraft concert, once again Diggs was doing some vocal ad-libs on it.
We're ready to drop it. Drop it right now!
And I think taking that approach to the vocal samples rather than just going with the Drop That Game on It sample would have worked significantly better in this case. Overall with this EP, I like what Clipping are trying to do with their sound. I think for a first venture into dance music, I'd say certainly production-wise this is successful. They've got quite a few of the tropes down already, and I think they could definitely look into combining those with the more experimental side of what they do. Where I think they fall down is in discerning the difference in structure between a club track and a song. Although that said, my favourite remix on this EP is the Nothing Is Safe one, as it straddles the two worlds very well. It's got exactly the right balance of the dance floor elements and the hip hop elements, and yeah, I'm really impressed by this one. As for the least favourite remix, for me that ends up being Drop That. The production is pretty neat on this one, but of all the tracks I think this is the one that makes the least impact on me. And of the instrumental tracks, it's definitely the one that would have benefited from having more digs on it. Is this collection of remixes better than the originals? Partly. I actually think the remix of Nothing Is Safe just slightly edges out the original for me. As I say, I think there are certain elements of the original that perhaps I like more than in the remix, but as an overall package, the remix coheres a bit more for me and I like it more as a result. The remaining tracks on this EP don't really trouble the originals as far as I'm concerned, but at the very least these remixes do make me hope that these aren't just a one-off experiment and that Clipping do flex their dance floor muscles a bit more in any future projects that they may be working on. Quick note here, while I was editing, Clipping actually dropped a cover version of the Jay Quan song Tipsy. Not an EDM track, so this review very much still applies, but yeah, it's well worth checking out if you've not already heard it, it's superb. So yeah, that is my review of Clipping. Do you agree with this review, disagree with this review, ambivalent to this review? Let me know in the comments below, and if there are any remix albums or EPs that you think I should take a look at, bring it. Please do subscribe to this channel if you want to see more reviews of remix based content, and yeah, thanks for watching. This review is over.